All right, the subject by way of introduction, what is evangelism? The word evangelism is somewhat of it's somewhat of a transliteration, but not exactly. The word evangelism comes from two different words. EU in the Greek means good. EU means good, and then you have the word angelos. When you're looking at your handout there, it says AGG. Okay, in the Greek, when you have G's, when you have G next to G, it makes what we would call the NG sound. So it looks like, if you knew the Greek letters, it looks like agelos, but it's angelos. Angelos. And the word angelos is our word we find for angel. And the word angel just simply means messenger. And the New Testament uses the word angelos in both the spiritual way in which we think about an angel, and then also uses it in regard to men. Men can be messengers, and so the context determines the meaning. And just by way of example, all of our Bibles that I've ever seen in the book of Revelation, chapters 2 and 3, says, to the angel of the church at Ephesus, to the angel of the church at Thyatira, to the angel of the church at Smyrna. Notice, all 7 churches are addressed, but specifically it's addressed to the angel of that church. And I think the better word is messenger, because there weren't literal angels occupying those churches and preaching to those people. And the word means messenger, so it would refer to probably whoever it is that was tasked with the majority of the teaching in that particular church. But when you read angel in Revelation 2 and 3, don't think about a spirit being. Think about a physical messenger. Here's the message for you to give to the church where you are. And so evangelism comes from good and message, or good. A messenger. And so as a verb, well, look at there. Got some of these young stragglers, rodents. Not rodents. Rodents. Man, good to see y'all. As a verb, the word is found 54 times in the New Testament. For example, in Matthew 11:5. The poor have the gospel preached to them. That's the phrase there where the word is found. It's found 76 times. Found it 76 times as a noun. We talk about what does the word gospel mean? Well, it means good news. But the word is euangelos, and then evangelist. It appears as Philip the evangelist in the book of Acts chapter 21, verse 8. In Ephesians chapter 4, he set in order these things in the church: first apostles and prophets, and evangelists, pastors, that is shepherds, and teachers. And so, and then finally 2 Timothy 4 and verse 5. Paul tells Timothy to do the work of an evangelist, and so that's a designation for one who delivers the good news. All right, now number 2, in our present vernacular, in other words, how do we use the word evangelism? I would say it's anything that contributes to the teaching of souls. Anything that contributes to the teaching of souls. And I made this note: conversion is God's business. Teaching is my business. Now, let that sink in. Conversion is God's business. Teaching is my business. It's not my job, although we do sometimes use it, like we say, I converted him. Well, we know what you mean. I know what you mean by that. But conversion's the work of the Lord. The Lord makes the change, but He makes the change through the messenger and the message. And so, Our job, when we think about evangelism, we oftentimes, and this has just been my experience being a lifelong member of the church, is that our idea of evangelism is how many people are baptized, and that's not the measure. The measure of evangelism is how many people are taught. That's the true measure of evangelism. You could have a very evangelistic church with very few baptisms, right?
It's not our business what they do with it, but it's not.
It's their responsibility what to do with the message. That's why I always say Mark 16:15 is our verse, not Mark 16:16. We like to think Mark 16:16 is our verse. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. But that's the verse that belongs to the people who hear the gospel. Our verse is go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Verse 15 is our verse. Verse 16 is the verse of the person who hears the gospel. So you could be a very evangelistic church with very few baptisms. And on the other side, you could be a not very evangelistic church and have a considerable number of baptisms. For example, if you had a lot of young people and all your young people, one year we had a bunch of baptisms. And by the way, I'm not discounting baptizing our kids because we have enough kids that have never obeyed the gospel. But a large number of our baptisms were our kids, which that's a good thing. But us baptizing a small congregation, I think we might have baptized 12 or 15 people that year. Maybe 8 of them were our young people. And my point is, the fact that a church this size baptizes 15 people in 1 year doesn't necessarily make us an evangelistic church. You see? And so our concept of evangelism, our view and understanding of evangelism needs to be focused on how many people are being taught, not on how many people are being baptized. And then letter B under number 2, still in the introduction, it's my conviction that as much as is possible, all collective efforts should be pointed toward evangelism, and many of our personal ones too. In other words, everything we do needs to have some type of evangelistic thrust or attachment to it. Now, first on the list is benevolence. You can give away the farm and never teach anybody. All right, so just simply being benevolent doesn't mean that we are evangelistic. But I think our benevolence needs to have an evangelistic thrust or attachment to it. Now, this is something that I ran into, and I had no idea, and I think maybe the laws changed at one time. But when I was at Eastwood Street in Paris, Tennessee, which is where I served as an associate before I came here in the early and mid 90s. Our benevolence committee, our deacons and whatnot that were over benevolence, only met on Wednesday night. And so if you wanted to see our benevolence committee, you had to come on Wednesday night. And one thing they told them was, if you want to meet with us at 7:30, you got to be here at 6:30, and you got to at least sit through Bible class. Well, which seemed like a good thing, but it ended up being against the law, because as a was it a 501c, or whatever it is that churches are, you're not permitted to force people to attend your assembly in order for you to give them benevolence. And so we found out that we were in violation of the law. And so there are things that we have to be mindful of when we practice our benevolence. But the early church was extremely benevolent. Extremely benevolent. It was benevolent primarily toward its own brethren, because the early church, was a gathering of Jews from all over the world that when they obeyed the gospel, they didn't go home. So you had thousands and thousands of Christians of Jewish descent, who didn't have a place to live. They didn't have jobs. And Acts chapter 2 talks about how the early church was benevolent toward the immediate church. And in Acts chapter 6, the very first controversy in the church surrounded difficulties with benevolence. The Grecian widows were being neglected in the daily administration of benevolence for the brethren. But what we find is that when that situation is corrected, that's where we get what we call, the Bible doesn't call them this, but we do, the first deacons. Remember, the apostle said, it is not good for us to leave the preaching of the word to wait on tables. And it wasn't that Peter and the apostles thought they were too good to wait on tables, but they had a lot more important job, to do than wait on tables. Because you have thousands of Christians that need to be taught, and they're all starting from scratch. All the things that we take for granted that we have at our disposal to know about the church had to be orally given to the church. And so the apostles couldn't leave that in order to wait on tables to handle the benevolent needs. And they said, choose out from among yourselves 7 men whom we may appoint over this business. And the Bible says the saying pleased the whole multitude. The church was happy to see it. And Philip and the cantor and there were 7 men chosen. The apostles appointed them over that matter. The matter was corrected. But here's what the Bible tells us at the end, and sometimes we forget. It caused the church to grow. When the church takes care of her own and does so in an efficient way, it causes the church to grow. And the Bible says a great company of the priests were obedient to the faith. Even the religious leaders of the local Jewish community saw what was going on with the church. And the Bible says, they were obedient to the faith. They obeyed the gospel. And then you have the benevolence of the church in its extended evangelistic thrust, in that the church helped people outside of the church. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul talks about all of the funds that had been given for the relief of the saints who were in Judea. And Paul makes a very clear statement, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, in verses 12 through 15, that the generosity of the Macedonians and the generosity of the Corinthians and the brethren in that part of the world, their generosity being sent back to Judea not only met the needs of the saints, but also specifically says to all men. And so their generosity was such that it met the immediate need, and then they were able to meet the needs of those who were outside of the church. And then the Bible says, because of that, many thanksgivings were made to God. Which seems to me like those people were converted. That those people were converted. Because of the benevolent generosity of the early church. And so our benevolence needs to have an evangelistic thrust at every part. Look, sometimes we help people that we'll never see again, right? And what have I done in times past? I give them my business card, with my name and the name of the church. I'll give them maybe a copy of. There's a book that we have it's not in the foyer, it's in the library security room, called "Someone Died and Left You a Fortune." It's an evangelistic book. It's a one-on-one Bible study book. It's a great little book. We've got another one called God and Man that was recently published out of Atlanta. But my point is, when we help people that we're never going to see again, at least we can put something in their hand for them to read somewhere down the road, and just pray that the seed that's sown in that case will bear fruit. But when we're helping people that are local, we need to follow up on that benevolence. Invite those people, invite those people to attend services. Invite those people to have a Bible study. Invite those people to at least enroll in a Bible correspondence course. Offer them a Bible. We've got Bibles on hand, dozens. We have dozens of brand new Bibles on hand to give away to people. And by the way, we live in the buckle of the Bible Belt, and you would not believe how many people do not own Bibles in Marion County. It's unthinkable how many people in this county do not own Bibles. I'll share this with those of you that have never heard it, but years and years ago, I say years and years ago, probably 15 years ago, maybe 20, I can't remember, when Nellie Ray was still attending. She had some family that moved from Virginia Beach to Marion County. And one of her, I guess her great niece was Brittany Coatney. And Brittany was coming to church with Nellie Ray, and Brittany obeyed the gospel. And being a young Christian, I gave her a Bible with her name on it. Well, it just so happened that the Sunday that I gave her Bible was Friends and Family Day. And there were 8 girls from Hamilton Middle School that came with her. So she brought 8 friends with her. And when I gave her that Bible, it was right out there, about not hardly as far down as where John and Tammy parked, right there in the parking lot. And I handed her that Bible, and one of the girls said, "Hey, do you have another Bible?" She said, "I don't have a Bible." And before I got done, I found out only one of those girls had a Bible, and I think the Bible she had was one of them little old Gideon Bibles. But I gave 9 girls, junior high girls in Marion County, a Bible because they didn't have one. And that really opened my eyes to how far we've descended even in our culture and society. And so, but everything we do, needs to have some type of evangelistic thrust. By the way, if you want to give somebody a Bible, we have some of those from World Bible School that have all that information in the back about the church and worship and the division of the covenants and church organization. I mean, it's a great tool to give somebody that doesn't know anything about the church. And so we have that as a possibility in our evangelistic efforts. Right here. Make room, Buck. And then our fellowship needs to have an evangelistic flavor to it. We want to show people that we have a loving church family. And the times that we spend together as a church family, need to reflect the love of a church family. Now, what that also means is that when we have people that come and they come to our various events, don't sit where you always sit with the people you always sit with. At least make some attempt to sit with our visitors, or to at least introduce yourself to our visitors if people are already sitting next to them. But what kind of impression? Ask Matt and Ashley what type of impression it makes. When you show up and people act like they're glad to see you. I mean, makes a huge difference. I told you they came to a back to school thing and they didn't even have a kid old enough to go to preschool. Little John was real little John back then. But being around, the things that we do, when we have our bonfire and our outdoor singing and those types of things, those are opportunities to show people that this is a group of people that love one another. And there are a lot of people in our world and in our communities that don't have the kind of support system that we have, even in our physical families, but much less in our church families. And those things are extremely attractive to people who do not have them. And so our fellowship needs to have an evangelistic flavor to it. Our living, our discipleship, our holy living needs to be contagious, so to speak, or infectious, however we want to describe it. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. People will be ready to give an answer to those who ask a reason of the hope that lies within you with meekness and fear. Don't walk around acting like you were baptized in pickle juice. As a Christian, you have every reason in the world to be happy every day. Every day. Joyful. And I said happy. I think joyful is a better word, because look, sometimes we're going to be sad. I preach enough funerals, even for people that I preached one this week, people I've never met. There's a time of it's sad, but you can preach a message of joy in a time of sadness. Jesus preached a message of joy to Martha in her time of sadness. Lord, if you'd have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Right? The first words out of his mouth, your brother will live again. See, message of joy in a time of sadness. And so, our lives need to be lives that are marked by joy. Look, I'm not talking about that fake, syrupy Southern joy that everybody. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just people that are genuinely joyful. Pleasant, and those are the kind of people other people want to be around. So our holy living, our personal discipleship, our service to others, Galatians 6, 9, and 10. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, but especially those of the household of faith. Galatians 6 and verse 10. Verse 9 says, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for we shall reap in due season if we faint not. Be a helpful person. Be a helpful person. Volunteer to help people. Go out of your way to help people. And I'm talking about that in a separate sense from benevolence, right? I mean, I guess we could think about those things in the same way, but we want to be a helpful people. If you see somebody, look, nobody's ever stranded on the road between here and Hamilton, but what I don't stop. I'm gonna roll down my window and I'm gonna say, "What do you need? Do you have a phone? Have you called somebody? Are you expecting somebody? Can I call somebody for you?" A lot of times they manage to limp in here to the parking lot. I mean, just not very long ago, guys smoked a deer down here on the new bridge. Just busted the front end of his vehicle all to pieces. Man, the water's pouring out of it, and he managed to get to the parking lot, and I just happened to be nearby. Just happened to be coming by, but he called somebody. And I said, "Look, man, don't worry about moving your car. Do whatever you got to do. You got to go to work today. Go to work today. But rest assured, your car is not a problem for us sitting right here. Just be kind, be helpful." Those things making. And by the way, I told him, so I preach here. I let him know that I wasn't just some yahoo telling him that he could park anywhere. Like people that give other people permission to hunt other people's property. No, not that. It's like, hey, I preach here, and I can tell you that it's all right for you to leave your vehicle here. All right, take care of your business and come get it when you can. All right, so we want to be a service to people. And understand those types of things make a difference. And then lastly is this, under number 2, our worship. Now look, our worship is not geared to unbelievers or guided by unbelievers, but it can certainly influence them. Right? Look, For a long time, there was this crazy, unbiblical idea that the worship this was adopted by the world, and then the church which is always last to adopt any idea, good or bad, and in this case they adopted a bad one. The idea was, you need to create your atmosphere, your worship atmosphere needs to be created in mind for the person who's never been to church. And that's as wrong as it can be. It's as wrong as it can be. When we gather here for worship, we've got one goal, primary goal in mind. And that is to worship God and honor God. That is our primary goal. All right? Then extended from that is edifying one another, right? Our worship glorifies God, it teaches and edifies one another. And then being done, as Paul said in 1 Corinthians 14, being done decently and in order, it appeals to those who are, for lack of a better term, properly oriented in their thinking. Even if it's something that they don't expect, they can see that it's being done right. I mean, because, the guy that comes in off the streets that's completely, for the best part, completely unchurched, he walks in here, and what's the first thing that he notices? What's the first thing he notices? Just go ahead and say it. No piano. That's exactly right. Where's your piano? I mean, that's the first thing people will notice when they simply walk in the building, right? There's no guitar stand over here, and drum set over here, and piano over here, and 76 trombones or whatever it is that that people want to use. And it's strange to them because they're expecting to see a thing and they don't see it. But then what happens when a congregation worships God in spirit and in truth, and everybody opens up their mouth and sings? What kind of impression does that make on people to be in the midst of that? Right? And I'll give you a secular example of this. 3 or 4 or 5 years ago now, I can't even remember if it was before or after the pandemic. We used to play the national anthem on our iPad before every basketball game at Hamilton. We'd have everybody stand up. There's a flag in the gym. Everybody face flag. We'd play the national, and we'd play most time. We'd play the Marine Corps band. Nobody's singing. It's just the music. Like at the Olympics, it's just the music. One day, man, McCracken's sitting over there, and it ain't working. He's sitting on the other side of the gym from me and Jeff Goff, and he's looking at me, and he's like, he has no idea what's going on. And I leaned over, and Jeff Goff's standing right next to me, and I said, dude, we may have to sing this thing. Because we've already told everybody to stand up and look at the flag and take their cap off, all right? It's too late to say, never mind. And so I'm the PA guy, so I got the mic in my hand, so I just started singing it. And while I was singing it, I'm doing my hand like this. I don't have my hand over my heart. I got one hand on a microphone, and I'm telling everybody to start singing with me. And you know what they did? They started singing with me. And by the time it was done, it was really good. And by the way, everybody credited the Church of Christ for saving the national anthem, because we're the only ones that know how to sing. I mean, literally, I won't tell you this. One girl that's a little bit younger than my kids walks over and says, COC saves the day. All right? So then for the next several years, that's what we did every week, or every ball game. And pretty soon word got around, hey, when you go to Hamilton, it's going to be different. Everybody's going to sing the national anthem, and it's really neat. You know, and my point is when people are used to just hearing a thing as opposed to participating in a thing, it makes a huge difference, right? Well, the same thing goes with our worship. People come in and they see everybody grab a songbook and start singing. Man, it makes an impression. It makes an impression on people. But we don't do it to impress people. We do it to worship God. And by the way, I'm gonna make full confession right here and now on that point right there. I hate it when our singing's not good and we have visitors. I hate it. Because it makes a bad impression. Now here's the thing. They may not know anything about music. It might be the greatest thing they've ever heard. But to me it sounds like, two cats fighting. Off key and slow. But we need, and by the way, I've preached this to y'all over and over again. We ought to have good singing every time out. We got too many people with too much ability, and we got too many things to be glad about, joyful about, to have bad singing. And so our worship is not geared to unbelievers. It's not guided by unbelievers, but it can affect unbelievers. And so we want to keep that. We want to keep that in mind as well. All right, I've already heard one bell. Lord willing, we'll start next Lord's Day morning on what does evangelism look like at the bottom of that left-hand column. We'll start with number 1.